All right, exam review. Let's go over four projects. Again, just like last time, I'm not going to use the names. I expect at this point you to recognize the building. We'll go over the character defining elements, the things that are important to know about each of these projects. And for the exam, which will open up tomorrow morning, only three of these four buildings will be on the exam. So you would do well to be prepared to write about any one of the four. Only three will actually be the options that you'll have to write about on the exam. So making it a little bit easier in that I think on the prior exam we may have reviewed 7 or 8 projects, of which I believe 4 were options. So I'm reducing the possibilities so that the preparation is a little bit less. But with that, I do expect a little bit more writing and more in depth. The one thing I want to focus on is I've given many of you this feedback on your essays and your exams. When you have an insight, such as the scale of this building suggests something otherworldly, or an interest in the empire or the culture, wanting to communicate with a higher power or convey a notion of higher power. These are all great insights, but stay with those ideas and go further and explain why you say what you said. So provide the insight, but provide the architectural language to follow up that insight and to explain why you have that insight. Um, for example, if I'm writing about one of the buildings at the Forbidden City, I might say something to the effect of the lifting up of the ground plane and setting the building on top of a 2 or a 3-story plinth is suggesting something otherworldly, or an interest in communicating with the gods, let's say. Good insight, but I might follow that up by saying, and proof of that is the fact that the building itself actually never touches the ground plane, and the building is lifted up to suggest that it is a temple or an altar for sacrifice, such that it's lifted up beyond the ground plane and set on top of something, such that it's actually closer to the heavens, or something to that effect. So the insights are great. I think the insights were, everybody had wonderful insights on the first exams, or the first exam and the first couple essays, but not everybody is following up with that insight and providing some of the language that you're learning and the vocabulary that you're developing to explain that insight. And also use the vocabulary terms. I posted them. I don't need to go over them individually. All of you are capable of looking at them. We've talked about these on many projects. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just read them aloud, just to remind you that I do expect on the exam, slightly different from the essay, where on the exam I am asking you again to use at least 3 of these terms in your responses. The dugong, we'll look at examples. You know what that is by now. The pagoda, the tiered roof tower, you know what that is. A stupa, negative space, the use of negative space, very highly relevant in the couple projects we'll look at from the Ming Dynasty or in the architecture of China. Not so relevant in the architecture of Islam. Pax Mongolica, the Chinese piece or the Mongolian piece. The tiered roof, very similar to the pagoda. So kind of shifting now to the Islamic architectural elements, the Imaret, Kami, another name for mosque, derived from the Arabic word jami. Opus mixtum, notion of mixing mixing elements and textures together on a facade. The mihrab, the niche in a wall, which orients us towards Mecca. Iwan, which is a rectangular hall or a space, usually vaulted, walled on three sides. You saw really good examples of this in the architecture of Islam in Iran. Brackets, architectural device of wood or stone, oftentimes supporting the roof, like corbels. The mukarnas, I think you know what that is. A minaret, promontory, and program. So you have the vocabulary terms. They're on Canvas. They've been on Canvas for probably over a week now. Familiarize yourself with them before you start your writing on the exam. Okay, let's look at the buildings. Again, I'm not going to use the names. I expect you to be able to already identify them. And if for whatever reason you missed the lectures or didn't catch the building, try and use the information I'm giving you to identify what it is and study it before you start writing about it. This is at the Forbidden City. It's one of the buildings at the Forbidden City, built 1406 to 1420 during the Ming Dynasty. The emperor who developed this project was Emperor Yongle. I believe he was the third emperor of the Ming Dynasty. And really, this building, which is, as you probably know, is part of a campus of a larger series of buildings, and all of them together are part of an endeavor to create a new city in China, a new capital for China. So maybe talk about what the level of energy and money and detail and resources might go into something when an emperor is trying to create a new campus that marks a new capital versus maybe something more utilitarian. And the results when more effort is focused, more resources are concentrated, more money is spent. The notion of something elaborate versus something just well done. All part of the mandate of heaven. So China is in this period of believing that there's a sort of virtuous mandate being given from above to build something that represents this people. They start to build to last. We start to see more use of masonry, but also even in the wood construction, as in this case, we see heavier members being used. We see higher amount of craftsmanship in the detailing, and we're building even better now than we were in the 12th or 13th century in China or before. The pagoda is a key element clearly of this architecture. You see it in the central element and you see it in the two flanking elements. So talk a little bit about the roof form, the tiered roof form, the building up of the tiered roof form, and how that conveys greater sense of formality, and how that separates the buildings apart from more less formal buildings, and kind of creates a hierarchy that it's clear. The best example I'm thinking of in my head is looking at federal architecture in America, putting a sort of decorative colonnade with a pediment, by providing more formal architectural elements, we're conveying a building of more importance. I think this is clearly being done in the Ming Dynasty, and the work here at the Forbidden City, and specifically with regard to this building here. The raised ground plane is a key element. I used it in the beginning as an example of an insight you might want to share. But the idea that this building is not touching the ground, the building is actually set on top of a base that's about 2 or 3 stories tall in and of itself, kind of separating. The ground that we walk on is not the same as the what would be the piano nobile or the primary level of this building. And culturally, this is a period of extreme conservatism in China, and that. Well, let me just ask: is that evident in the architecture, and can you glean this sort of emphasis on formality and extreme kind of conservative values, kind of inward-looking values, keeping out those who don't belong, if you will? And craft, high emphasis on craft, as we've talked about. So detail, the dugong. You should know exactly what that is. You should know exactly where the dugong is represented here. So maybe talk about that. Weave that in with the notion of entablature, which you already know and you've written about on prior exams. Okay, so that's this building, which you know. There's a close-up view. I should have maybe used this slide for the last 2 or 3 elements, but the pagoda, the tiered roof, the dugong, the entablature, the craft, the ornamentation, the building out, the kind of filling in the volume of the eaves. Okay, plenty to write about here. The second so expect a plan like this when writing about this building. And you should be able to link those together. Okay, and the second we want to look at is this one. Same time frame, exactly the same time frame, 1400, so 15th century, early 15th century, 1406, 1420. Same empire, same ruling class or same ruling family. This is Ming Dynasty. This is Yongle. This is still part of the mandate of heaven, this kind of vast enterprise of building, because there's this belief that higher power is asking the sort of Chinese people to really establish themselves and have an architecture that is built to last and is going to reflect well on the magnificence of this time period. 1406, 1420. I won't say the name. Good, excellent example to talk about the pagoda, the building up. We talked in the lecture specifically about this, about some of the kind of mathematical relationships of the depth of the eave and the changing of that depth as you move from top to top down. But also the diameter of the tholobate or the drum as you move up, and kind of starting to read the relationship between those two. That might be something you talk about here. We're starting to see a little bit of stone and brick. So there's a marble base. You're looking at a marble base. You're looking at a tiered marble base, similar to what we saw in the prior example. This building is built entirely of wood. And there are actually no nails or fasteners in this. This is another really good example of craft and uniqueness of craft. This is all joinery, basically. All the joints, all the column to beam connections, the walls, everything is attached to one another and is stabilized structurally without the use of any mechanical fastening. It's all done by joinery, wood joinery, slip joint, butt joints, rabbet joints. You don't need to know the taxonomy of or the different types of wood joinery methods. Just understand that this is unique to Chinese. This is unique to Chinese and Japanese architecture, but really we're focusing on China in the 15th century. So this is a unique example of that. Marble base I talked about. Okay, so that's this is at the site of the Temple of Heaven. So know what this building is. Detail of the marble base. Another view of it. Another view of it here. Okay, those are the two from the architecture of China. Let's look at the architecture of Islam. Okay, we want to use this one as one of the possible three buildings that will be on your exam. This is a mosque. I can give that much away. Built 15, so middle of the 16th century, built 1543 to 1548. It's in Istanbul. The architect is Mimar Sinan, Mimarsinan, Mimar Sinan, built of, so some of the character defining elements, built of stone, granite, and marble, combination of. One of the unique things about the Islamic architecture of Turkey is the use of a couple things. The building up and the pyramidal form that if you were to kind of step back and kind of read the thing as an overall mass, you have a high point in the middle and you kind of slope away from that midpoint towards the outside bases. And that's accomplished by setting a tall central dome, dropping that down to a second level with the semi-domes. Those are if you remember the diagram I had showed on this lecture, there's they're basically the half circles that are attached to the square that hosts the large dome, the central dome. So the semi-domes are at kind of level 2, and then that drops down to kind of the 4 corner points at the 3rd or the 4th level down. So there's this kind of pyramidal form being established. This is known as the Prince's Mosque. One of the key efforts here, this has repeated itself already several times in the work that we've looked at so far. It will continue to repeat itself. The idea of trying to create something new architecturally based on a prior precedent and trying to surpass that prior precedent. We talked about how Santa Maria del Fiore and Brunelleschi's work there is endeavoring to surpass what was done at the Pantheon. Similar in what's being done here is endeavoring to surpass what's been done at Hagia Sophia. Might be a reference you make in your writing. We talked about the central dome. We talked about the semi-domes. The pointed arch is used, and we see that more on the interior, but we do see it even on the exterior, but in some of the smaller elements. So start to read kind of the subtleties and the details, not just the main primary elements. And the minarets are key elements here. We talked about what the function of a minaret is. If you want to refresh your memory, just read the vocabulary terms. There's a functional purpose to the minarets. They have architectural function, but there's an actual programmatic function with the minaret as well. And they become, I would say, framing devices. They're sort of setting the stage for what's happening in the center. Expect a photo of the interior. If you would like to describe, use any of the character defining elements we talked about on the exterior and kind of tie that into the interior, you might consider talking about how even on the interior of the volume, you can read the large central space and you can actually read the semi-dome maybe better on the interior than you can on the exterior. So this is It was actually a really good example of a building having a lot of its qualities evident on the outside as well as on the inside, in that it stays sincere to its kind of formal gestures out as you're approaching the building from the outside. You can read those semi-domes attached to the square central volume, but also you can read that when you move on the inside as well. So there's a sort of authenticity there. Okay, that's plenty there on this one. So it has a night view of the same building. That's Mimar Sinan. Okay, so expect that on the exam, and possibly that's no, not that one. And another fourth option could also possibly be on the exam, would be this one. So we're in Esfahan now. We're in Iran. We're still in the architecture of Islam, but we've left kind of Ottoman Empire now, and we're in Persia. Might talk about the angular approach, and the reorientation that occurs as you move along this wall, enter through this niche, and then kind of recenter into the mosque. You might talk about, there's the diagram of the kind of 3 or 4 different iterations that the architects of the Ottoman Empire were playing with in terms of how to attach a semi-dome to a central space. This one. Okay, sorry. Now we're in Isfahan, architecture of Persia or of Iran, modern day Iran, 17th century, built by Ali Akbar Isfahani, named after the city in which he contributes a lot of his talent and skill. So that's Ali Akbar Isfahani, early 17th century, 1611. This is also an urban renewal project and kind of creating a new center, a new capital for the empire. Isfahan is being established as the center of the Persian Empire, and Sheikh Bahai is similar to Emperor Yongle, doing the same thing, concentrating a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of resources in this focused area, and trying to build something that's going to last, that's going to reflect on the magnificence of this time period, and is encouraging the architects to do creative and unique work that will help set the architecture of the Persian Empire apart from the architecture of the rest of the world. It would be hard to look past and to not talk about the Mukarnas detailing here, the building out of the volume, the detail, the ornament, the relief, the use of the 7-color mosaic motif. I talked in the lecture about the logic behind that. There was a very practical reason for the use of the 7-color mosaic technique. Also a great place to talk about the Iwan, which is a space before a space. It's really the entrance. Again, read the vocabulary terms to refresh on that. The pishtak is basically it's the Iwan, but it's really just the square that surrounds the pointed archway. So if if this element altogether really is the Iwan, um, but the pishtak is basically the square that surrounds the opening. So this archway, this pointed archway, has surrounding it a square, and that square surrounding the archway together makes up the pishtak, which is the composition that frames the Iwan, which is the entrance to the mosque. So you might write about that. It's a unique thing geometrically. We haven't really seen this before, but I would say it's a unique thing that belongs to the architecture um, of the Persians. Iwan, Pishtak, 7-color motif. The use of the bulbous domes here. And there's not a good picture. That's okay. You can. There you go. You got the bulbous domes immediately behind the Iwan. There's another view of it there. The Mukarnas, Iwan, really Pishtak. I guess think of the Pishtak as the solid here in the plane of the wall, and think of the Iwan as the negative space or the void that's created by the Pishtak. Rhythm, symmetry, framing, negative space, I guess used probably as prominently here as it was in the two examples from China. You might write about that as a character element. Formality, approaching on a bias. That's plenty. So I would say kind of expand on those 4, 5, 6 different kind of character elements that I've touched on with respect to these 4 amazing works of architecture that we've been looking at for the past 3 weeks, probably. Okay, good luck. Enjoy. Spend maybe a few more minutes than you ordinarily would when you feel like you're done. Give yourself 10 more minutes, go back through it and kind of refine it a little bit. Do well, and I look forward to reading and grading the second exam. And we will move immediately into we'll go back to Europe, and we're going to start looking at the architecture of the Protestant movement. Thanks, everyone.